Hello, in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at how to build an agent that interacts with your Notion workspace to perform different types of actions, whether you're trying to retrieve information from your Notion workspace or page or a specific database, or you're trying to create content inside Notion and you want your AI agent to be able to go and interact with it or make updates, these types of things, right? So we're going to be doing that. We're going to be showing you how to build this agent. Now, thank you and shout out to the person who actually requested for this video. They were asking for this video specifically for their company where they want to build an internal help desk that helps their employees to ask questions of a specific Notion page that contains all of their company policy information. So this is a very common use case. We see it quite a lot. I've seen it a lot in different organizations that I've worked for, where people want to have an internal help desk that is smart, so people don't have to clog up emails asking these questions to people. So very good use case, and I think this agent will be able to do that. But it also is an agent that is helping me to manage and track my own processes. So whether it is managing my content workflow, which is something that I do quite a lot, kind of creating content and managing it over here. So this is going to help me to be able to do that. So as an example, I have a simple question. So you looked at my current board, content board, and I have three contents that are marked as done. So I want to see if this agent will be able to go figure out all of my content that are marked as done. So I have a question related to one of my database pages called Prompt Circle Workflow in Notion. How many total content ideas are completed? So here I'm expecting this particular agent to be able to go interact with our MCP server, which has a bunch of Notion tools, and it's going to be able to go in there and find this particular answer for me. So here it's able to answer the question. So it says the total of three content ideas that are marked as completed, the status of done, right? So, and then it shows me all the actual pieces that are marked as done, which is great. Now, I could have used the custom MCP server for this, and by the way, you can actually use it. I think it's pretty good. It just has certain limitations and does things inefficiently, and I'll show you why. One of the reasons I wanted to also make this video as well was to talk about best practices when you're thinking about building MCP servers. There is the temptation to create tools in your MCP server or create tools more generally speaking for your agent that are API calls. But what we find sometimes is that agents struggle with API calls. They struggle to understand the sequence of API calls, the number of API calls, whatever the attributes should be. Sometimes they're not really kind of understanding exactly how to combine things. And for something like Notion, it gets a little bit tricky because of the hierarchy of a particular content that you're interacting with. So you could have a page that has sub pages, that has a database, so all these things, you want to be able to kind of almost empathize with the agent, right? You have to kind of think the agent doesn't really know a lot about your workspace or your tooling. So you want to give it as much help as possible. So that's the mental model when you're building MCP servers. Okay, so as an example, the same exact question that I asked took this agent 21 calls, 21 tool calls to be able to answer the question. And what it was doing behind the scenes when I looked at it is that it was looking at each single page to figure out what the status was, which is a completely inefficient way of doing things. Now, when I go back and look at how our agent actually solved this particular problem, you would see that it took a little bit of a more efficient route. So it did two tool calls, right? One, searching the entire workspace for that specific database page. And the second one was just simply to query the database specifically to get the information it needed. So it had the database ID and it could get all the information that it needed. And it also has, kind of the count and all the information it needs, right? So two calls, right, compared to multiple calls. Now, another thing I noticed, and this is why it's very important that yes, you're thinking through this to be as prescriptive as possible when you're building these agents out is that it also takes different approaches. Actually, when you look at it, it took different approaches each time I asked this particular question. So here, for instance, is doing, I think, let me see. I think this might be the right question. So this is the one where I'm asking it the question. So here it's taking one, two, three calls, but nothing more than three calls. Most of the time, three calls. And that the fewer calls your agent makes, the better it is actually. And you want to make sure that you're limiting that by providing as much context as possible. All right, let's look at another example of how I could use this MCP agent. So say I'm thinking about a specific topic that I want to talk about. So I think one of the things that has been out there in terms of agent building is UI generation. I love UI generation so much. A way to combine, a conversational interface, but with UI components provided as responses. And I'm definitely going to be making a video about that. So let's actually input that as one of the videos that are upcoming that I want to make. So I can just tell my agent, I intend to make a video about UI generation. Please add this video to my uh, database and add that I will be exploring the AI SDK for UI generation specifically. Okay. All right. So here, what I'm expecting the agent to be able to go do is to go into that database and add a new entry to it. So currently, as you know, we have about 12 non-started stuff, two in progress, and three that have been done. And now you could see that it has actually added AI for UI generation right here. And you could see also that it is giving me that confirmation as well as a link, which is pretty cool, right? So this allows you to do some interesting things. Like I can come back here and say update the video to in progress as an example. So I could just say, update this video, mark it as in progress, and it will be able to go in and make that update as well. So let's take a look at this to see if it's going to do it live. All right, so it's gonna head to update my AI SDK generation video and mark it to in progress. So let's see if it actually did that. So here we have our status now is in progress. So this gives you like full carte blanche for you to be able to interact with your Notion workspace in the ways that you want. So almost like using your agent to take notes and make sure that those notes are in a place that are accessible where you can go look at them. And also imagine combining this with things like search. So I can, research a content idea and just output it into a Notion page using an agent. So there's so many cool things you can do with it as a result. All right, so I'm going to be showing you exactly how to build this out. There's several components about it, so we're going to be diving in, showing you step by step how to do it. And I'm also going to be dropping the link to a GitHub repo where the full implementation is. So if you want to, you can go straight there and see it for yourself. It's also going to be on the website on fromcircle.com, so you can actually access and play around with the agent if you want as well. All right, so let's dive in. All right, so here's our to-do list. First and foremost, we want to set up our project with all the dependencies that we need. We want to create a client that's going to interact with the Notion API because we want to make sure that we're interacting with Notion API. We're going to build a bunch of functions that do that. We're going to initialize our MCP server and the tools that we're exposing there. We're going to set up a client agent, and then finally, we're going to set up Slack. All right, so let's jump in and get our project set up. All right, so to get started, we're just going to go ahead and clone from the GitHub repo, which is our tutorials repo, which contains all the various MCP servers that we're building, as well as agents as well. So you can go ahead and clone that repo. You can cd into the Notion MCP server folder, and then you could do a pip install of the requirements as txt to get you all the various dependencies installed. So basically, fast MCP, fast API, a Notion client, and then we're going to be using LangChain and LangGraph here, and we're using OpenAI as our LLM. All right, so those are all the things that you need to get started with. Now let's dive into the code. All right, so let's jump into the code. So I'm gonna go straight into the Notion MCP agent folder. So this is where our actual implementation is, and I'm just gonna walk you through a few things. Now, before we actually continue with this, there are a few API keys and tokens that you need. So we're gonna go through each one once we get to the point where we need them. So I would assume that you already have like an OpenAI API key or an Anthropic API key or any other model. It really doesn't matter. When we're using LangGraph to build agents, you could pretty much use any LLM that is supported by LangChain. Okay, so first things first. Since we're building a Notion solution, you need to go to developers.notion.com to grab your Notion token. So to grab your token, you want to go ahead and hit the view my integrations. And in there, you could go ahead and add a new integration. Once you save this integration, you're going to get a Notion token, which you should add into your .env file. I have a .env example file here where you could just basically drop your token. I already have my token in there. And the same thing goes for your OpenAPI key. I'm using Langsmith for observability. I think very, very recommended that if you're building any solution that is LLM based, that you have an observability suite. Langsmith happens to be both observability as well as allowing you to do things like evaluation, creating data sets for fine tuning, these types of things. They're not sponsoring this video, but I can tell you for free, this is a very, very important piece to building production grade agents. Okay. So when you have the time, spend the time to go spin up a project in there, sign up, and gather your keys. So I use it for every single project I work on because it makes it easy for me to go back and trace back and see what's going right or wrong. Now we'll talk about a little bit about the Slack side of things. I'll show you how to go grab that. But let's talk about our functions. So in terms of the functions, so this is where we're storing everything that is interacting with Notion specifically. So it's been split into three. The Notion client is sort of where we initialize the actual Notion API. So you could use the API. So this is just basically intended for that. So it has basically all the main API functions that you could use, from a Notion perspective. So whether it's get page, get database, query database, update page, and so on and so forth. Now, I think this is typically where people say all these are tools in your MCP and we're good to go. But I tend to believe that you should actually take a different approach, which is sort of going a step further beyond some of the APIs that we have here and build something that is a little bit more context rich, right? Context aware, right? We're building agents or you're building MCP servers that should be context aware. So this is why we've created these two other functions. One is a context aggregator. So again, being able to go and get a comprehensive page context so you can pull all the information that is needed for a page information because like I said, Notion pages have hierarchies. So one page can have multiple pages in them, multiple databases, databases that have other pages, pages that have pages, and so on and so forth. So you can go, it can get crazy. So you want to make sure that you're getting a comprehensive page context, so you're not missing out on anything. That would really require you to get the agent to make more tool calls. So that's the whole principle or concept of building context rich MCP servers. We also have the ability to go search and aggregate. So not just doing one search, but you search and then you aggregate the entire thing. So you can combine these types of functions to make things much easier for your MCP server. So that's what all these functions are basically intended for, getting database insights. So basically getting like metadata, so to speak, of your database is another piece that we have here. And we have a few other pieces as well in terms of how we want our function to be extracted. So these are basically internal methods that we're using as well to interact with these with the functions, the APIs, and stuff like that. We also have something for database management. So, creating a database page in Notion, we created something specific for it. Updating the page. In fact, for our update page, we designed it to support both pre-pending content, replacing content, or appending content. So these things are all things you have to think about. Like, how does the agent understand these things? So, like, for instance, if you're kind of adding, you're going to say, oh, here is my page, here are the properties, here's the content, and I want to either append, prepend, or replace the content. So important for you to define these types of behavior, because you're thinking about behavior when you're thinking about how the agent interacts with these tools. So APIs don't really cut it. There's some sophisticated API endpoints that are out there, but most API endpoints are typically very granular. But you have to think a little bit beyond granular. You have to think about giving the skill or giving a behavior that allows the agent to be able to go satisfy that specific task. We also have something around upserting a page. So if you want to completely replace the page or insert the page, and then we have a bunch of internal functions that are in here as well. So that's for the functions for our tools. So we have a few of the functions available for context aggregation and for database manipulation. All right. So next up, we're going to then go into the actual MCP server. So that's server.py. And this is where we have all the MCP tools. We're using Fast MCP, the best library for building MCP servers today. So please use this. So here we kind of initialize our Fast MCP and all the things that we need to use it. I added this course middleware just simply because I was using Fast MCP from a web UI. I'm going to be showing you this web UI very, very soon. You're going to see it on promptcircle.com, where you can interact with all the agents that we show you on the channel. So you're going to see it very soon. And I needed course actually for it to work, because when you're interacting from the middleware, from a web page, it gets interesting. So this is basically pulling all of our functions in there, and then we're initializing all of that. And here's how we create our MCP tools. So you can see all the tools that we have here. Now, to start our server, right, our MCP server, we can just go ahead and hit the Python server.py, and this is going to start our server on 8080, on port 8080. Now, one of the easiest ways to test out your MCP once you're done with it, or check if it's working, is to use the MCP inspector. So the MCP inspector is so critical if you're building MCP servers, to have that, because it's a really good way to test out and see if your MCPs are good. So to install that, you need to use npx at model context protocol / inspector, and this is going to open up a web browser for you to actually see your MCP inspector. So there we go. See our MCP right here. You want to drag. So The transport type for this is streamable HTTP because we're using that, and we're going to go all the way down. We have a bunch of tools here, but I just want to show you very quickly. We have all those tools, and I want to show you how we are serving up our MCP. So we're serving up our MCP as a, so you can see it right here. So it's mcp.htp app. So this is for serving it up as an HTTP. So we serve it up both as an HTTP. If you want to also do it via STDIO, so that's standard input and output. We also have that option. So if you're kind of using it in things like Cloud Desktop and Cursor and stuff like that, this might be the best option. But if you're using it over the web, I think the HTTP Streamable is the one that I'm using, and that's what I prefer because I'm building an application that is pretty custom. All right, so and that's what we have here, streamable HTTP. We have our URL. There is no authentication here, and all I need to do is to hit the connect. Let's see here why it's not connecting. Is our server on? Our server is on. I think we have the wrong URL here. So 8080 MCP, hit the connect. We're connected, and this shows that you're connected. So here you can see basically all the prompts. I just have one prompt here, not really that important, but the important thing here is the tools. And here's where you see all the tools that we have. So these are all the various tools we have: get page context, search workspace context, get database insights. So all those tools, and you can see like doing a lot of work of providing like a ton of context in the doc strings for each MCP tool, providing a lot of information about how your agent should use the tool. And I think this is so important when you're building agents as well, is to give your agent as much information as it needs. Like pretend your agent doesn't know anything and give it as much information as it needs. Okay, awesome. So here you can now start to test your agent. So right here, we can test each one. So let's test the workspace context. So I have my content hub as a search, and you could search all of your workspace. You could search databases specifically, or you could search pages. So that's what this allows you to do, which is pretty cool. And you can see like definitely the type of context is pages, databases, or all. So this gives the agent also those options, like in scenarios where it is very clear from the input that what's required is a database, it will be able to actually do that work. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and run this tool here, and you're going to see it's going to just basically go run. Now, one thing I noticed while building some of this stuff out, which I want you to keep in mind, is timeouts. If you're calling API or endpoints that are latent, sometimes your MCP inspector might time out. To prevent that from happening, go to the configuration and increase the request timeout, right? Or maximum total timeout. You can increase these timeouts just to make sure that you're not losing, that it's not sort of breaking, on its own. So that tends to happen sometimes. So keep that in mind. Okay, awesome. So we can see here our tool seems to be working. We can see basically how we've crafted this. So you see like when it returns these results, this is a page. This is the title of the page. Here's the URL. Why are we doing that? These are all important things that our app needs, right? Our agent, sorry, needs as context. Does it have children? When was it last edited? All these types of things. Do we have some context preview? Like all these are so important. Making the responses context rich is the best way to give your agent a chance at solving these problems with either one shot, zero shot, few shot type prompts or requests coming in from your users. Okay, so you can go ahead and test all the other tools in here, and but basically these are the tools that we have. And now that we have our tools, let's move over and look at the next things that we want to look at here, which is setting up our LangGraph agent client. All right, so now that we confirmed that our server is up and running, the next step is that we need a client to interact with our server. And here we're using LangGraph. For me personally, I think this is one of the easiest ways for you to interact with an MCP server, or for you to create an agent, a functioning agent that works. And this is why I use this, but you could use several other tooling, of course. You could use A2A. You could use Google's ADK. You could use Crew AI. You could use OpenAI's Agent SDK, AutoGen. There's so many different libraries out there. But for me, in terms of the completeness, LangGraph, really, really easy to set up, but also has that observability piece and all these types of things. And also really good, especially if you're trying to use multiple models and things of that nature. All right. So they have built an adapter for MCP client, for MCP servers. So it's an MCP adapter client, which allows you to assign multiple MCP servers. So this is the specific class I'm using, which is multi-server MPC client. And this basically is how the tools are loaded from the MCP into the agent itself. So basically, this is something that converts MCP server tools into LangChain agents. So we're going to be using the create react agent. So this is a very, very simple agent that you could use, which has like information, like just very, very easy to set up. So you can just configure your agent. So you can pass in a model, you can pass in the tools. In this case, we're going to be passing in the tools through MCP servers. You can pass in your prompt. Actually, I want to explore this later on maybe in a different video, how to load prompts from an MCP server into your LangChain agent. We also have things like a response format. We have a pre-model hook, post-model hook, the schema of the state. So everything is basically stored here. So this is the fastest way for you to get started with an agent. Okay, cool. So now what we need to do here is like we need to grab our MCP server URL. In this case, is 8080/MCP. We want to initialize our multi-server MCP client. And because we're using streamable HTTP, well, all we need to do is basically pass in the URL. If we had any authentication, we can also configure that. And this is just a simple function to interact with our Create React agent. I've built in a few utilities that allows it to interact with both Slack and CLI. So we can just run it here to test it as well. All right, so now we're done with our agent. So let's go ahead and set up Slack. Now, to set up Slack, a few things you need to keep in mind. I have put in a Slack app manifest for you right here that you're going to use. So basically, this contains all the configurations that your Slack app is going to need to perform. Now, for local development, it's recommended that you run your Slack app in socket mode. So I have enabled socket mode in this, which would also help you generate an app token as well as a bot token. So to get this started in Slack, you need to go to API. You're just going to set this up, api.slack.com/apps. You want to create a new Slack application. You want to do it from a manifest. So I'm going to select my workspace right here. And then you want to go ahead and copy and paste in the entire manifest in here. So I'm just going to grab the manifest and paste it in here. So the manifest basically contains all the information. Now, I have some request URLs, but don't, this would be like if you are hosting, using events, using sort of a HTTP web accessible URL to host your app. So you can use ngrok, for instance, to expose your Slack application. But in this case, we're using socket mode. Socket mode just opens up a WebSocket with the app, which makes things much easier. So right here, we have this, and you hit the next button and you can see all the scopes are there. Everything is ready to go. So when you do create, you're going to get your bot token right? So you get your bot token from OAuth permissions. So actually, you need to install your application first. And once you install the application, your bot token is going to appear and you can grab that bot token because we're going to need it. Also, under basic information, you want to go ahead and generate an app level token. So you want to give this app level token a connections right, and that allows you to generate an app level token. So those are the two things you need from Slack to get started. So if I kind of go back here in our EMV the example, you see we have Slack bot token, Slack app token. Awesome. So now you have your Slack bot token, you have your Slack app token. We've set up the Slack client here to use assistants. So assistants is a new capability released by Slack, which allows you to build sort of they had kind of tooling for agents within Slack. So that's what we're using rather than sort of the typical messaging, which is what's usually used. All right, so we're using Slack Bolt. Slack Bolt is a really good um, library that makes it much easier for you to actually interact with Slack capabilities. And we're grabbing their async app, their async assistant, async set status, and async says say. And then we're grabbing the async socket mode handler as well as a web client if you wanted to use the web event handle. So we're also grabbing our LangChain agent because our LangChain agent is what we're going to be using to handle inbound messages. So this is how we initialize our Slack app. We're using the async app and we're passing in the Slack bot token. And over here on the assistant side, we're initializing our assistant as an async assistant. And now we can use this decorator to deal with different events that are happening. So when a thread starts, as an example, I'm just going to open up my Slack application right here. So slack.com. And I'm going to basically launch Slack, but I'm going to launch Slack from the browser so you could see this. So I'm going to launch it from the browser right here. So essentially, whenever I start a new chat, you notice that this response comes in. Hi, I am your Notion assistant and I can help you with XYZ, right? So the reason that is happening is because we've set up this thread started response. So whenever a new thread starts, whenever you said you create a new message, we're sending this response back, right? So this is a really good way for you to kind of create a really good user experience, tell the users what your agent is all about, what type of problems it can solve, and things of that nature. Now, the next event we're handling is whenever there's a new message. So here, when I say something along the lines of hi or whatever it might be, in my case, then it is going to start that. Actually, I need to start this event. Okay, so it's running right here. So actually that's fine. So when I say hello, and now this is the event that gets triggered, the assistant dot user message. So that's the event that gets triggered. We handle that event by taking the message, we set the status to is typing. So this is something, these are the new things that come with Assistant. You have sort of is typing underneath. And then we basically get the message text and we pass it over to our agent. Now, before we pass it to our agent, to make sure that our Slack assistant or our agent sort of has full context of the full conversation, so it has memory, we gather the entire thread, right, from a particular message because we have access to the thread. We gather the entire thread from the message and we always pass in the conversation history. This is so important because if you want to have a seamless experience while people are chatting with your application, you want to have conversation history. Memory is one of the most important things when you're building agents because if your agents can't remember the previous conversations they're having with you, most likely the experience is going to be disjointed. So this is why we're doing this. We're kind of creating our context from previous messages to make sure that it has that memory. And then we send that message over. We kind of set them in chronological order, so it's kind of logical in the way it is. And then once we're done with that, we get to send the message to our LangGraph agent, right? So we say, okay, we call ask agent this time around. Origin is Slack, thread ID is X, conversation history is that, and then we get the response back once the response is comes back. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. Like, that's how we handle messages in there. Finally, we initialize our Slack application to start listening in socket mode as we're doing right now. And you could just simply run it by running Python Slack client.py, and now it's able to answer questions. So I can say, yeah, tell me about or find my product backlog or catalog. Let's see how it actually handles this very vague question. So you can see here our Notion MCP is typing because it's thinking. Should say it's actually thinking because that's what it's doing right here. Now there are so many cool things you could do. Like, you could have set the state for this sort of status, like depending on what's happening in your agent. So that those are ways you can actually enhance this. Actually, maybe in the next implementation of this, I'm going to do something like that where you could actually, think through what it's actually doing and you're displaying all of that. Because Slack, unfortunately, doesn't have streaming, so it makes it a little bit difficult. And by the way, like I said, I'm going to make the actual interface that I'm working on available so that you could also see this in a different interface that you could stream from and things of that nature, right? So working on something, and it's going to be really, really cool. So you're going to see how you can interact with these agents much easily. Okay, so it's actually went and did some good job actually. So it went, found everywhere I had product backlog or catalog. Okay, amazing. So it did a good job here. So it went to find catalog, backlog. Yeah, so this is really cool. And I would assume it did two searches. Now let's see exactly what it did here. So this is find my product backlog or catalog for this specific call. It actually did only one tool search. Now, there's something that I want you to keep in mind with regards to building with the Notion search. Notion search will use AI to do some of its search, so which adds even way more intelligence. So that so really big kudos to the Notion team for adding this capability. If you have AI activated inside your Notion workspace, it's going to be used whenever a search is made as well. And this drastically improves, retrieval of context. And this is the pattern we're going to be seeing with applications as applications start building AI capabilities into their systems, into their tools. It means that agents are going to just have even way more context, to solve really complex problems, especially around retrieval of information, right? Because if you're using a keyword search, it makes it a little bit difficult. But here they can use an AI search to go find things, which means I could search product backlog or catalog, and that's completely fine. Rather than two searches, we could just make it one search. Okay, awesome. So that is it for today. This is exactly how to think through building an MCP server, deploying it into a usable place like in Slack, where you could distribute it. So if you're building these types of agents, that could be a very quick way for you to get it into the hands of people who may want to use it immediately. Now, until next time, I hope you have a great one. You're building amazing stuff. If you find this content to be useful in any particular way, consider leaving us a subscribe. And I would love to hear more ideas, more questions coming from you guys on things you'd love to see in terms of things that we can build together. Until next time, have a great one. Cheers.